I saw jars that shocked my mind at the time because they look like feet. I'm like, there's no way there's little feet in these jars. And sure enough, there was. And it just blew my mind away. But again, I said this many times, I had never been in an abortion clinic before. So I didn't know what really to expect. But common sense tells you that's not normal, even in an abortion clinic.
Hello and welcome to the Ann Phelan Scoop.
With me, Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phelan McAleer.
And we got the two of us today.
Wow.
Yes.
Back from Ireland.
So
still jet lagged?
Yes, just a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, so this is a kind of a special podcast today because Saturday will be the 10th anniversary of the conviction of Dr. Kermit Gosnell, the Philadelphia abortion doctor, who's serving several life sentences for the murder of babies, murder of his patients, and performing late-term illegal abortions. We'll discuss our memories of Gosnell. We'll interview several people who knew him. We'll talk. We wrote a New York Times bestseller, produced the Gosnell movie, produced a top-selling true crime podcast. We even did a play in New York, which was reviewed by the New York Times twice. Mm-hmm. They got so angry about it. But also, we're going to bring you exclusive photographs you've never seen before of Gosnell's exclusive lifestyle. Now, we're going to show you photographs from inside the clinic, but they've been made public before. But Gosnell's secret life, we've managed to get hold of the Gosnell family album and, the luxury, joyful life that he lived on the proceeds of crime. So it's quite a sight. And later, we'll be talking to the president of the National Right to Life organization,
Tobias.
Yes, about her memories
of Gosnell and what's happened in the meantime. And we're also going to talk to Jim Wood, Detective Jim Wood, our old friend, single-handedly the most responsible person for putting Gosnell behind bars. And he's always deflecting away from himself, by the way. He's constantly saying there was a whole team. We know there was a whole team, but it was because of him and because of his seeking out of justice for a Bhutanese refugee that this case was eventually as successful as it was. And Gosnell is serving, as we know, three life terms.
And we'll be having some exclusive possum photographs for you
at
as
the
well.
Very end of
at
the
the very end, just to leave you on a cheery note.
Yes, I've had a few people contact me about the possums. But yes.
Yes, we've a whole possum.
There's a whole possum thing going on now.
Yes, there is.
Yeah. It's like a wildlife reserve in our backyard now.
Whoever said possums were solitary, because we've got more than a few in our backyard.
Yes, we have a lot now. Yes.
Word has got out.
It may not have been a plan to have fed them in the first place. But first,
where are we now with Gosnell, and what lessons have been learned on both sides? Because good people learn and bad people learn lessons too. So let's remember what happened. 10 years ago, Kermit Gosnell was convicted by a Philadelphia jury for performing illegal late-term abortions and murdering 3 babies born alive during the procedures. He was also convicted for killing Karen Maya Munger. That was a manslaughter conviction, a miscarriage of justice, in my opinion. It's thought he killed hundreds, if not thousands, of babies illegally, or killed them after born alive. It's thought he did hundreds, if not thousands, in a 30-year killing spree. And of course, the Gosnell case, you'll remember, became a media sensation for a while, not because the media were going crazy covering it, but because the world's media refused to cover it. Journalists didn't and don't want to cover negative abortion stories, or abortion stories that show abortion in a negative light. Eventually, they were shamed into covering the trial. Social media was a different thing then. It wasn't censored. You weren't suppressed. You could actually put pressure on people.
So these days, there seems to be no such reticence about covering abortion stories, or we should say at least certain abortion stories. So since Gosnell, and particularly since Roe v. Wade was overturned, there's been story after story about women whose lives have been negatively affected, negatively impacted, because they live in states that have brought in abortion bans or very restrictive laws.
And of course, we know Hollywood has helped out with movies, lots of mini-series, documentaries, and a slew of network primetime shows dramatising the alleged plight of women who say they're unable to get an abortion or unable to get health care as an abortion in the new post-Roe world. Every one of the TV series we watch, series we watch, have had this type of story. Often we've had, they run abortion stories several times in the one season. We had to stop watching The Good Doctor because it was just relentless propaganda. And of course, we've highlighted before that Planned Parenthood even has a full-time staff member based in Hollywood whose only job is to help writers craft the storylines. Karen Spruce. But actually, given how cultishly woke Hollywood is, and the Hollywood writers are, who are currently on strike, and we're all supposed to feel sorry for them.
Oh, yeah.
But how cultishly woke they are, I don't think they need the help, but maybe they do. But, stories, the media stories and the Hollywood stories have concentrated and focused on certain states that have
restricted abortion,
yes,
or have semi-banned abortion.
Yes.
No state has fully banned abortion.
But
by the way.
whilst ignoring the trend of increasingly, and this is a bigger trend, increasingly permissive abortion laws being passed in very many states.
You call them permissive. I call them extreme. Yeah,
yes.
Very extreme laws, the kind of laws that nowhere in Europe don't have these kind of laws. Like Scandinavia, the very progressive Scandinavians wouldn't countenance the kind of laws that are now regular in the most populated states in America, in New York, in California, New Mexico, Colorado, Vermont, Oregon. Like it's a lot.
You can now have an abortion
up to 9 months
with no barriers, up to 9 months.
And we feel like that's a very, very untold story. That the media are very focused on these stories where the woman's life is threatened, and all these kind of very extreme stories that that I would really question in terms of from a medical point
rare stories, and we wonder, are they even medically sound or true? But, what the media hasn't focused on is that post-Roe, there have been 6 abortion ballot initiatives in the States. And what happened was the pro-life side was outspent, and the media creating a panic over restrictive laws. The pro-life side lost all 6 of these ballot initiatives. They even lost one in Montana, a state Donald Trump won by 16 points. So the media have focused on, as I say, bringing on stories on women finding it difficult to have an abortion.
But very extreme stories.
But there's been no stories about how in Montana doctors are not legally obliged to try and save the life of a baby born alive after an abortion. But they have given extensive coverage to attempts by the state's governor to legislate around the ballot initiative. Not the state's governor, the state's legislator and governor. There's also a dearth of, there's no stories about the increased number of women aborting babies up to 9 months in these states where we said that the rules have been completely relaxed. California, Michigan, New York, Colorado, Oregon, DC, and Vermont, and New York. You can now have an abortion for basically without any barriers up to 9 months. There are now we believe that there are now tens of thousands of these abortions every year. It's hard to get an exact figure because the CDC doesn't force states to collect the data or
which is interesting in itself, by the way. Yeah.
Why not? Because they know that it could be 100,000 late-term abortions across the United States. There could be more.
For example, so in California, the CDC don't make it mandatory for any of the states to report the numbers. California chooses not to report, and California, among any experts, anyone would agree that California is the place with the most abortions. So there's a huge amount of information.
I think you have to report to the CDC if somebody gets food poisoning in your restaurant.
Yes.
But not if someone has an abortion at 39 weeks. So the way it is, you got to think about it from both sides here. It's probably in neither side's interest to point out the fact that abortion has actually become easier to access since Roe, pretty much. Pro-choice advocates continue to push the narrative of women, in extreme medical conditions being denied medical care. That helps turn out donors and voters. The pro-life side probably don't want to highlight losing ballot initiatives also. They prefer to highlight their victories, increased legislation, etc. So the public believe that abortion laws are a one-way tsunami of restrictions. Which brings us back to Gosnell, he's pretty delusional. 10 years ago, I walked into a Philadelphia courtroom and found a story that led us to write a book, produce a movie, a true crime podcast, a play. And we're
still not finished.
We're still not finished. But an abortion doctor who is also a serial killer. As we know, this has meant us visiting and having many, many, many conversations with dear Dr. Kermit Gosnell. Boy, those conversations. He likes to talk. He really does like to talk. And these these conversations, there's always been one particular theme.
that he's innocent.
Yes.
That's what he does. He spends his days writing poetry and celebrating abortion and keeping fit. And when I say celebrating abortion, his poetry is about celebrating abortion. And he's keeping fit because he says when he's exonerated, he's going to celebrate by running a triathlon. So we eventually had to, block him phoning because we'd be at like a friend's wedding and the next thing the phone would ring and it'd be Kermit Gosnell. Will you accept charges from Huntington Prison? Which, eventually, I mean, I can see myself in the car one time. I was
in Malibu.
And I was like, having a nice day and the phone rings and it's like, this is this guy phoning because he wants to talk and obviously nobody else wants to talk to him.
Yeah, but at the time, I remember we felt he was delusional with his bad poetry and repeated claims of innocence. But given the changes now in laws in the blue, purple and even some red states, perhaps we
are the delusional ones.
Yes, perhaps we are the delusional ones. There hasn't been a ballot initiative in Pennsylvania yet, but given time, it probably will happen. In large parts of America, you can now abort babies up to 9 months, and doctors can let babies born alive die of neglect. These changes could be coming to Pennsylvania soon. Then you could legitimately ask if Gosnell would even be charged in today's post-Roe world. So watch this space. Kermit Gosnell could be running his triathlon yet.
Perish the thought. I think I'm very much hoping that doesn't happen. But we are very conscious of the fact that, and it's basically the definition of what we do here. This is an incredibly untold story. There was a time, Bill Clinton, talked about safe, legal, and rare. We're so far away from that now. The Democrat Party is so far away from that now. So the Democrat Party, their platform now is anytime, anywhere, anytime, for any reason, up to 9 months. That's what they're pushing for, and it's interesting. That's what they're pushing for legislatively, but that's not what the country wants. And we talk later to Carol Tobias about that. By the way,
we should go now to these photographs that we managed to get our hands on in photographs you won't see anywhere else.
And I think what these photographs for me tell is like, so this is Kermit Gosnell in his heyday when he was regularly murdering babies by delivering them alive, inducing the mother to give birth to a baby and then cutting that baby's neck with scissors. This is how he looked when in the evenings and on his weekends while he was doing this. And we're talking about 30 years of this killing spree. Look at him there. In his, cycling, enjoying, and look at how many of these photographs, by the way, have him with family and with children.
Yes.
Enjoying family, enjoying his children, enjoying his life, enjoying his boat, There's a lot of family photographs. We are blurring out the photographs of the people, other people in these, but these are very young children here in these photographs.
Oh, look at him with a baby.
Look at him with a little baby holding the baby's hand. Look at that, holding the baby's hand there. And this is him that's the lake house there.
Well, he had a lake house.
He has the lake house.
Yeah.
And there he is again.
By the way, the lake house is now, I believe, owned by his lawyer.
That's how he paid for his thing. There he's having a lovely beer, hanging out with one of his daughters, gorgeous. Another one with the daughter.
I think it's a daughter-in-law.
Daughter-in-law, maybe. And there he is. Look at him in his swimming gear on a beach on a holiday.
Because he's going to do a triathlon.
Because he's just going to do a triathlon. And again, all these happy...
Well-dressed man.
Again, with another photograph with a child.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of photographs of him with a child.
Always
smiling. And this is him that looks like a foreign country, by the way. That looks like it might be somewhere in Asia or whatever.
He's doing a triathlon.
Yeah, and he might have been doing a triathlon. But there he is at the Holiday Inn.
Having a ball.
Another family photograph there. Look at the number of times, I don't know, many we've seen now already with him holding a baby.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of photographs like that. Again,
playing
card games lying on the floor. There he is, another triathlon. And I'm just flicking through these films because just for people to get a sense, living the life. What a happy time he was having. Yeah. And it's super creepy actually to think what this man was doing for a living during all of this living the life. As I said, there's the boat out on
that's a ski. What is it? One of those ski boats?
Yeah.
I like this one because this is him in his filthy kitchen. His filthy kitchen. But also, look at the amount of utensils. Now, you do a lot of cooking.
I have a similar number of utensils. I'd prefer you not to draw attention to that.
You don't have 6 containers of utensils.
You'd be surprised.
But then a whole wall of utensils. I mean, okay, maybe, but anyway.
But for a doctor to be working and to be clean, look at him cooking in a kitchen as dirty as that. And I can't really talk, but that is a pretty disgusting situation.
We've been in his various places where he works, and it's pretty awful.
Yeah.
So let's now go and talk to Carol Tobias, of the president of the National Right to Life. Yeah.
Yes.
About post Gosnell, and let's go over to that interview now.
Well, we're very, very happy to be joined now by Carol Tobias, who is the president of the National Right to Life Committee. And we've had Carol on the show before. I was just looking at this up, Carol. It's been a couple of years. You're very welcome back.
I'm happy to be on.
As you probably know, I think I wrote to you, this is a very significant week. This is 10 years, the 10-year anniversary this week on Saturday. 10 years since Kermit Gosnell was convicted and imprisoned for 3 life sentences for what he had done. What are your memories? We're just thinking, this whole podcast today is looking back on what's happened since, what happened then, and our impressions of all of that, and why we did all the things that we did. What was your first contact with this story, with the Gosnell story?
I think it was something that showed up in National Right to Life news that I read, and that it was happening. I was just shocked that, I guess I knew that there was just a dirty side to the abortion industry. But this really highlighted everything that is wrong, that there are no protections for women. The abortionists can pretty much do what they want, without impunity, until, thankfully, this one actually did. Gosnell was held accountable for his crimes. But I think my biggest shock was this wasn't a real story. It was pretty much buried by the media around the country, and people still don't really know what's happening inside those abortion facilities.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, it's a classic, fantastic news story, and as a journalist, we can say that it's a story that just screams out to be on every headline. It's got a hot political issue. It's got racism. Like, don't forget, Kermit Gosnell was a racist. He had nicer rooms for white women than black women. He was black himself. It's got all that interracial racism. It's got real racism. It's got bureaucratic state. It's got how regulations don't work, and it's got murder. It's got the murder of an immigrant. Most of Kermit Gosnell's clients were minorities. It's got all that, but the media steadfastly refused to run this story. One Washington Post writer famously said, "We don't cover local crime stories." But I mean, in that respect, George Floyd was a local crime story.
Yes.
So none of this made sense unless you realize they're not in the news business. They're in the pushing an agenda business,
which becomes more significant. Yes.
So you were surprised. You had a suspicion there were Gosnells out there, but it was a shock. You're saying that when you really realized,
just how bad it was.
Well, there were stories, of course, throughout the years. So I guess we did kind of realize that the reporting wasn't happening as it should. Women were being victimized, but this one I think was just so blatant. The fact that he was, holding the babies in his refrigerator, and, there was just so much that all kind of came together, that other abortionists might have been accused of one thing or another. This just seemed to have it all. And I thought another great example, or I guess story that we should be telling of this, is that the local abortion facilities, Planned Parenthood, knew about it. Because women had come into their facility after being at Gosnell's and talking about how horrible it was. The health department had been given, information, and they didn't do anything about it. There were just so many others that I think were complicit in covering up what was actually happening in that building.
That's a very good point.
Yes.
I mean, and by the way,
important point.
I missed so much about the story that the media should have covered. Yeah, you're right. I mean, 2 women died in that facility. And the health officials never even went in to investigate. These were...
The National Abortion Federation went in to investigate, and they found that it was too horrible. They didn't want him as a member. but they didn't tell anybody.
That's right.
But they didn't tell anybody.
It was the worst they ever seen, they said, but they didn't tell anyone. They just let women go on because, by the way, they were minority women, and who cares?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and the idea is that they care about women, but I think we know for sure that they don't. You know, moving forward from that, do you think anything has changed? So this 10 years has passed. Obviously, we know Dobbs was the massive change. What else?
Dobbs was the overturning of Roe.
The overturning of Roe v. Wade
Yeah.
and the Dobbs decision, which has been the big legislative change, I suppose, since Gosnell. Do you think that the Gosnell case changed anything otherwise in the country?
Well, I think it definitely made pro-lifers more determined. They don't want this happening to their fellow women, and I think abortionists are probably under more scrutiny now than they have been in the past. Certainly, pro-lifers have a lot more news outlets than they did. Not just relying on mainstream media, but all pro-life groups have their way of getting messages out, whether it's social media or still their own newsletter. That I think anything like this that happens is maybe being covered a little more. I know it still happens because there were other cases like, well, if Gosnell did it, why is this guy, still doing it? But I think the pro-lifers are more focused on making sure that if something like this does come out, it is disseminated.
It's interesting. I think you've put your finger on something that's interesting that I've been kind of very conscious of, and that we've been thinking about recently as well. Is that I think with Gosnell, the story really got traction because of social media, because of pro-lifers using social media to talk to each other and to get this story out. Molly Hemingway famously, and we wrote about her a lot.
Yes.
In the book. She basically took on Sarah Cliff, who famously from the Washington Post that Phelim referred to earlier, who had said this is a local news story. And Molly Hemingway directly tweeted to Sarah Cliff at the time and said, really, this is a local, really? And the Washington Post within a few days had to basically backtrack and apologise and say, of course, this isn't a local news story. So I think, in a way, for me, both of you could disagree with me, but I do think that somehow the pro-life movement discovered social media through the Gosnell case because it was their way of getting this story out.
But the social media discovered the power of social media and have spent the last 10 years censoring pro-life and conservative voices because they realised, this is a way of conservatives and alternative people and people with interesting points of views from actually amplifying those points of views and asking people difficult questions. And so the establishment protected the establishment, and they've now spent the last 10 years using algorithms and straight out bans and censorships and shadow banning to stop stories taking off and to stop questions being asked.
Have you found that, Carol?
Oh, definitely. I get a lot more information from social media, news information, than I do looking at just websites of like I said, the mainstream media. There's a lot that they might have one sentence or they don't mention it at all. And there's a lot happening, and you find out on social media. So we have to be on, all these different networks, outlets, to make sure that we are getting the message out.
So since Dobbs, one of the things, just talking about the media, and I think this is kind of, become really aware of this. Since Dobbs, there's been 6 ballot initiatives where the abortion question came up. 3 of those ballot initiatives were pro-life, and 3 of them were pro-abortion. And unfortunately, in each case, the pro-life movement failed. And I think the reason that happened was because the media has been, since Dobbs, the media have been terrorising women, mostly women, terrorising women with these stories, these very dramatic headlines that we see, that because of the ban in Texas, women will die, women are going to die. What have you been aware of all of this incredible amount of mainstream media collusion with the pro-abortion side to terrorise women about the restrictions?
Anyone that's paying attention at all to the issue has to notice how bad it is. Yes, we are hearing stories from various states about how women are suffering from ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages and problems, complications that have arisen, and they're going to die because they can't get help. Part of it, I truly wonder if there are, I know there are some doctors and hospitals that are concerned about lawsuits, and they, don't want to get involved, and they'll just tell her to go away and, come back if the situation gets more serious. But I truly believe that there are also some doctors out there that are trying to make it sound as scary as possible. And I would question whether they may even be putting the lives of their patients in danger because they want to use them as an example to try to enhance abortion and stop pro-life efforts to save those babies.
This is very possible, and we saw that. We've actually covered a story in Indonesia where environmentalists used a sick baby to push a case, and the baby ended up dying rather than getting medical treatment because the baby was a poster child for their particular cause. I mean, so yes, there have been a lot of anti-abortion legislation in some states since Roe was overturned, but there have also been a huge slew of laws and legislation widening abortion access to some of the most permissive abortion laws on the planet. And those have received no attention. Most people don't know that in many of the most populous states in this union, you can have an abortion, really no questions asked, up until 9 months. Most people don't know that you can let a child die from neglect if it's born alive during a botched abortion. Most people don't know that. And the media are not telling them that, but they're telling them possibly fake news stories about
women's health being in danger.
Yeah.
But what we also hear is if a state is looking at passing a bill that would protect babies after 15 weeks, they call it an abortion ban. But they aren't telling the people that 95% of all abortions would still continue. If they set it at 12 weeks, which North Carolina has just passed a bill, and I believe the governor is going to veto, that says abortion will not be allowed after 12 weeks. That still allows about 90% of all abortions to be performed. But we're going to be hearing that is an abortion ban. Several states have laws that allow abortions or prevent abortions after 6 weeks, after the baby's heartbeat can be detected. That still allows about 50% of all abortions to be performed because most abortions, or at least half of them, are happening in the first 6 weeks. And yet that also is labeled an abortion ban. And, it's just the language that, for anyone who sees it, hears it, if they can, whether it is a local newspaper that you could do a letter to the editor, if it's something that's online, they have, all these sites have comment sections, use social media, let people realize this is not a ban. And just one more example quickly, when it is a heartbeat bill where the baby is going to be protected after the heartbeat can be detected, we always hear a state is banning abortion after 6 weeks before most women know they are pregnant. Most women by 6 weeks do know they are pregnant. There may be circumstances the girl, is too young, or a woman just thinks because of something that happened, she's not capable of getting pregnant. But by and large, most people realize that if you have sex, pregnancy is a possibility. You can go to a Walmart, Walgreens, most stores, you can go to dollar stores and get pregnancy tests. And yet we always hear, a bill would stop abortion after 6 weeks before most women know they are pregnant. So those are the kinds of things that pro-lifers across the country and even around the world could make a difference. Stand up and educate people that that's just not the case. And, the media in so many places and cases just aren't telling us the truth.
And the people who are buying into it, by the way, who have bought into that, are the people who are making the laws. They're this kind of elite who are setting the agenda. I would like to, I hope you'll, I wonder whether you agree with me. I think if the regular population of America actually knew, I think if they actually knew that babies were being aborted at every stage, and right up to 9 months. I don't think that's what they want. I mean, I would have thought that Bill Clinton's old, safe, legal, and rare was much more. Am I delusional about that, or has the safe, legal, and rare been completely replaced with anytime, anywhere, whatever I want?
The American public still wants safe, legal, and rare, but the abortion industry and the people making our laws do not. They've tossed that out the window.
Well, Carol, I mean, on that kind of downbeat note, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave you there. But thank you very much for coming on the show. Please, anyone who's anything to say to Carol or us, please leave a comment below in the YouTube or in the Apple Podcast app, or in the we want to hear what you think, because this is a conundrum, how so much of America doesn't know the truth about abortion, and how we can get the truth out there, because we're journalists and we just want to get the truth out there and want people to know the facts to make up their own mind. Thanks for coming on the show, Carol.
Thanks, Carol.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. That's the way the world is at the moment. There's
much work to be done. I think that's what I got out of that interview. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to go over to talk to Jim Wood.
Yes,
the man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah, who really put Gosnell behind bars.
And who has become a great friend of ours through the amount of through the work that we did on the movie, on the book, on the podcast, and just is what a wonderful representative of police in the United States. What a great guy. Let's go over to that right now.
And now we're joined by Detective Jim Wood, who was the dogged investigator who first realised that something just wasn't right at 3801 Lancaster Avenue, and it was his curiosity, it was his gut feeling and some evidence that led him to look further. It was his innate curiosity that so many people in this world, a quality that so many people in this world seem to lack these days. It was that innate curiosity that brought him into 3801 Lancaster and led ultimately to the conviction of possibly America's biggest serial killer. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Jim. It's great to see you.
Hi, Ann. Hey, Phelan. Good to see you guys, too.
Can you tell us, so you were a detective in Philadelphia, but you weren't in the public health department. You weren't in the murder department. You weren't in the child abuse department. You were in the drugs department. I suppose department's not the drugs unit. And you weren't even strictly in the police department either.
Right.
So tell us where you were, and what was a good looking guy like you doing in a strange place like that?
My whole career, I spent mostly doing drug work. Even before I was a Philadelphia police officer, I did a stint in Ocean City, New Jersey to start my law enforcement career out. And they put me undercover in 1984. In 1986, I joined the Philadelphia Police Academy because I always wanted to be a police officer. And it was a short time after that I got involved in drug work, because back in the mid 80s to late 80s, crack cocaine became a big problem all over America. And from there, I slowly climbed the ladder of narcotics investigations, where I wound up in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office as a police officer, believe it or not. And while my time there, I took the detective's test, and I actually made detective at the DA's office. And shortly thereafter, that I was transferred from the DA's office narcotics unit back to a busy division investigating major crimes in Southwest Detectives.
Right, but when you were investigating Gosnell, you were still attached to the DA's office. Is that right?
Yes. So a short while after I got back to the DA's office, I spent a couple months in Southwest Detectives, got back to the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. And then I think it was 2009, we started using an undercover Richie Gramlich to make oxycodone purchases. The big oxycodone pill back then was the 80 milligram pill. It was widely abused, and it made a lot of people addicted. And Gosnell came on our radar because he was the source of supply to the people that we were investigating.
And it's interesting. We have that tape actually. We should play it where the very first time his name is mentioned, and it's actually kind of funny. Let's just listen to that.
Who are you taking me to so I know? You know what I mean? Like,
Guys, I mean, you talking about what doctor?
yeah.
I told you about Gosnell.
Who?
Dr. Gosnell.
Dr. Darnell?
Guys, Gosnell. Gosnell.
Okay.
History was made that day where she spells it out. Gosnell. She says the name.
I just told the story, that exact story, the other day, because you can't make this stuff up. When we're looking for the main distributor, whether it's regular drugs or a doctor, we're trying to find the source of that supply. And I remember specifically I was standing in the street, and Richie Gramlich was in his car, and I'm prompting him, come on, Rich, get her to tell who the doctor is. And so finally, that's what he does. He just comes out and asks her who the doctor was, and he kept misunderstanding what she had said.
Darnell. Yeah.
And that's when she got frustrated and said, no, Dr. Gosnell, and spelled out the whole name.
If it wasn't being careful, it could be a poor Dr. Darnell in Philadelphia, sort of, with lots of surveillance pictures of him. But anyway, it wasn't Dr. Darnell, it was Dr. Gosnell. And very quickly it became more than a drugs issue, didn't it? You got some information, you thought, this is not right. So tell us about how it moved from a drugs raid to really America's biggest serial killer.
So we moved up the ladder, and your great movie portrayed it well. We would always give somebody the opportunity to cooperate as we went up the ladder. And ultimately we got to talking to the secretary at Gosnell's office, Latasha Lewis. And she was the first one to give an idea of what was going on. Not the entire idea, but just how dirty the office was, the instruments that weren't cleaned, and all of the other crazy stuff that went on in the office that we didn't believe until we actually saw it. But one of the most particular things she told us about was the death of Karna Mangar. She didn't know her name at the time, but she gave enough information that we contacted the medical examiner's office and ultimately identified Karna and got the medical report. And that kind of solidified what Latasha had said, that Linda Williams had given medication to this poor woman and she ended up dying. And here, the only way we figured out who she even was and what happened to her was getting that medical examiner report.
But I think, before we go on to the night of the raid, which I want to go on to next, I think I want to stop for a minute and just recognize what happened here with Karna Mangar. This was a Bhutanese refugee who had come to America. She was in America 4 months before she died after a botched abortion at Gosnell's clinic. However, the really important part is that her death went unnoticed by everyone except for Detective Jim Wood, and I'm so proud of the quote that is in the book that we got from Christine Wexler, the assistant district attorney on the case, who basically said Detective Jim Wood was Karna Mangar's champion. He was the only one. He was the only one. If it wasn't for you seeking justice for this woman, for this Bhutanese refugee who we're meant to believe American progressives would care so much about what would happen to her, that the system would care so much about a refugee. And no one cared. No part of the system cared about her death until you turned up.
They closed the file. They investigate, allegedly, a health department in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania allegedly investigated. They didn't even visit the clinic. No one had visited that clinic for 17 years, despite 2 women dying in those 17 years. So
Jim, and I'm going to say this because Jim mightn't say it for himself, but because of his doggedness, he actually went out of his own purview. He was at that point working, strictly on the drug case, and he asked, and you could correct me, Jim, but I think I'm correct in saying this. You asked if you could also investigate what had happened to this woman, and you got a search warrant that also allowed you to ask questions about Karna Mangar. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Ultimately, and I think any detective getting the information that a woman died and no idea of how she died, or the little bit that we had that some untrained woman gave her a drug that killed her ultimately, and the doctor was and held accountable for that was absurd to me. I couldn't believe that this did slip through the cracks. It never should have happened. I can't say I could blame the police or other detectives because they weren't even aware of it because it was hidden so well. There was a break in the system. Somebody should have questioned why 𝙤𝙤𝙤 𝙤𝙤𝙤 died, and they didn't. And I just, one of the first things I did was look for a police report, because when you have a death, whether it's a suspicious death or a murder or any kind of suicide, there's a police report conducted and an investigation done. And I couldn't find anything near that. So it just was fortunate that we were able to track down that medical report and follow up with that.
Yeah. And that brought us, flash forward then, that brought us to the night of the raid. I want to kind of, give people a picture of that, because also from your point of view, and I remember you and I have had many, many conversations. We've talked to you so many times about this story, but, Philadelphia is quite a city. And I think, I remember you talked about somebody, I'm trying to think who it was, but some, big shot guy that was there who said basically, you're in here for the ride of your life.
But being a detective, being a police city, Philadelphia,
you're going to see everything.
It's a free ticket to the greatest show on earth.
Yeah, but you mightn't want it or whatever.
No, but I think you said it very well. He says, I don't know if it's free.
But I don't know if it's free. So basically people, Philadelphia police officers have seen basically everything. But then you got an education, something that night, 3801, that night that you went to 3801 Lancaster, you saw things that you had never seen before. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so actually it was both nights. I think I was there 3 nights in a row, which was way too much for anybody. But the first night was the initial raid when, again, we knew 𝙤𝙤𝙤 𝙤𝙤𝙤 had died. So we were looking for evidence of demerol that was in her system, that was in the medical examiner report, and other evidence related to her death. We actually found the envelope with her name on it with the money still inside in Gosnell's office. That was another creepy thing to come across.
But talk us through, like, when and I know you all gathered outside, and he'd been working in the clinic that he worked at in Delaware. So he came late in the evening. I think it was like 8 o'clock at night. You're all standing outside waiting to meet him, and he has like his food with him, and he's got these bags and stuff. And you approached him and said, we've got search warrants for you for these premises. And he actually thought you were looking for something across the road, because obviously West Philadelphia, plenty of things happen. Talk us through that first time you walked through the door there.
Sure. So we were waiting for him to come back from his office in Delaware, and we weren't sure whether he was going to go home first or go to the office. And fortunately, most of us were at the office, and that's where he arrived. So we approached him, explained that we had a search warrant for his house and his office. And he didn't seem shocked at all. He just was matter of fact. He was on the phone with his wife, and basically didn't act in a way that most people would react, especially someone in a professional business would be, I think, upset or show a different kind of attitude that
totally.
he had. But it was cavalier, as we all know he is. And we walked into the office. He asked if he could bring his lunch and his briefcase, and then he asked if he could bring the bag of clamshells.
Yeah, this is a very important, very important point here, because when you're being when there's detectives, when you're a doctor and there's detectives in your clinic looking for illegal drugs, illegal drug dealing, potential murder, all that. What's the most important thing you do? Tell us, Jim, what he wanted to do.
He wanted to bring his clams in so he could feed his turtles. That was most important on his mind at the time, which, again, the beginning of our Twilight Zone experience with Gosnell.
But again, walking through that door, what was the first thing that hit you?
The smell. It was a horrid smell of death, a mixture of chemicals. It just so hard to describe, because it was just a a horrible smell.
And this is,
Combination.
and again, I just want to point out to people, like, this is coming from you. You know, it's not your first murder scene, by the way. It's not your first crime scene. You know, you've been around, so you know. And I think we know from all the people we've interviewed, not just you, but also all the other people who were on that raid, who basically all talked about the smell. That it was completely.
Who was it? Somebody said they had special Gosnell clothes that they would burn when they would come. I think it was Christine.
And also Joanne Pescatore.
Yeah, they would burn their clothes because you just couldn't get the smell out of it.
Yeah.
And that's a good point, because I think one of the most genius moves in the trial, and Phelim, you were there to see it, they brought in the equipment. And when I was in the courtroom myself, I could smell that smell emanating from the equipment. So I'm sure the jurors probably smelled it as well. It was just a pungent, foul odor, just an odor of death, basically.
Yeah, well, so we have some photographs, actually. So tell us about some of the other, that's the olfactory madness.
But as you walk through, we're going to show people as we're talking.
So you open a cupboard, and what did you see in the cupboard? Let's start there.
I saw jars that it shocked my mind at the time, because they look like feet. I'm like, there's no way there's little feet in these jars. And sure enough, there was. And it just blew my mind away. But again, and I've said this many times, I had never been in an abortion clinic before. So I didn't know what really to expect. But common sense tells you that's not normal, even in an abortion clinic.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, it's almost a cliche now. And I often wonder, sometimes you hear, serial killers, they keep trophies, and it's like, well, actually, maybe all the movies are right. Maybe serial killers do keep trophies. This is classic serial killer behavior, because not only were the baby feet in jars, but they were labeled as well with the names of the babies and the names of the mothers and the dates of birth and all this kind of thing. So this is, as you say, the Twilight Zone.
Well, there was one other thing that made me think it was a trophy too, is when the night we took the babies out of the freezer, Gosnell specifically told me about 𝙤𝙤𝙤 𝙈𝙘𝙤𝙤 baby and I'll never forget it. Every time I look at those pictures of the freezer, and I see in the far right corner, wrapped in a paper towel, white paper towel, was a plastic bag. You could see right through the plastic bag, and it had the initials KM on it for 𝙤𝙤𝙤 𝙈𝙘𝙤. And Gosnell specifically, I want to say, boasts about that, showing that to me that night. It was absurd.
The refrigerator was filled with babies. How did he know exactly where it is? And he must have been in looking at it.
Well, he had that. No, I mean, I think that one was separate from the others. Isn't that right?
That was the only one the baby. That baby was the only one by itself, and specifically, he pointed that out, which made me think, and you have to remember, 𝙤𝙤𝙤 𝙈𝙘𝙤 died in November of 2009. Now we're there February 18th, 2010, and several months later, and that was still.
And I mean, there was cats everywhere. Let's just look at the photographs of the cats.
Did you see cats that night? I know you. I think was it you that took the photograph?
Yes, yeah, I took a photo of the cat, and the cat was right in the area where there was blood on the floor, blood stains on the floor. There was litter boxes there that were full. There was. It was a mess. And we had heard that from, I think it may have been Latasha Lewis, that there were cats in there and cat feces all over the place. And that probably contributed, I'm sure, to the smell of the death in that office.
And an unusual thing happened there. So there were patients in there waiting to have abortions that night that you guys were there, and you had two members of the Department of Health from Harrisburg who'd eventually you managed to get them to turn up. And bizarrely, a very bizarre thing happened, because suddenly you were asked, tell us what happened. Quite an unusual thing happened, given the circumstances of how dirty the place was. There was cats all around the place. There was this smell of death. And yet, what was allowed to continue that night?
So we had the nurses there to assist, and I didn't actually know their purpose at the time, that they were associated with abortion clinics. But there was a problem with one of the women, and they allowed Gosnell to finish a procedure that he had started because the woman was bleeding. Now, I don't know why they allowed him to do that. Myself and Jason Huff, the FBI agent in the case with us, were astounded that that was going to happen. It was one of his acting supervisors that approved Gosnell to do this, which again was ridiculous in my mind, because I understand you need, emergency services, but we had emergency services coming anyway. So I don't think it would have hurt just to wait another minute or two longer to have them looked over by someone who's qualified, not Gosnell, the murderer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, we could, we could rehearse the whole story. I mean, it's an incredible story, and a lot of obviously the people who are listening here are the people who made it possible for us to write the book and to make the movie and
do the podcast,
but the play and the play. And we're not finished yet. Sorry, Jim, what did you just say there? Sorry.
I was just saying, and everything you guys have done has been outstanding and right to the point, and we and my whole family really appreciates it too.
Well, I was very pleased and honoured to meet your mother,
yes,
the legend.
The legend.
During the run of the play in New York, she came up to New York. This is a woman whose husband, she had 10 children, whose husband had
12
children. Wow.
Yes.
Okay, 12 children. Whose husband was diagnosed with MS in his 30s, had to give up work. She had to keep the family going, keep the 12 kids clothed, fed and watered, as they say. And, I met her just a year or two ago. She's a wonderful woman, has raised great sons and daughters,
and also the family. Your father, I know, that was in law enforcement, and most of the family are in law enforcement. Quite a number of you. I remember being there a few years ago and meeting some of the rest of the squad.
Two of my son-in-laws, one's a Pennsylvania State Trooper, the other's a Philadelphia police officer. Yep, it's all in the family, which is great. It's a wonderful experience. You take the good with the bad, but there's always light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Well, talking of light in the end, and we have to come to the end because we're running out of time, unfortunately. But remind us of, I know, so basically, Jim worked this case right up until the end, but. And it was a huge case, involved an awful lot of police, officers, a lot of crime scene detectives. The FBI were involved.
Super people.
Incredible team. But none of it would have happened without the fact that you were dogged about Carnamie from the get-go. And I think everyone in law enforcement recognised that. And so when it came to arresting Gosnell, they said, let Jim put the handcuffs on him, even though really it shouldn't have been you, actually, because this was a homicide. I'm talking about the homicide side of the case. Tell us about that day, about putting the handcuffs on him eventually, and tell us about that. Describe that.
So in police work, it's a lot of times ceremonial when you take down a big criminal, or some significant arrest in your career. For whatever reason, it becomes ceremonial sometimes. So during the time I was talking to Gosnell that day, I told him, and it was true, I was going to retire. I didn't mean from law enforcement completely, but at that time from Philadelphia, I knew my time was running to the end because I wanted to move on and work somewhere else. But in saying that, Gosnell said, "You retired me," and it kind of made me feel really good. And a short time after that, I placed the handcuffs on Gosnell, and he was transported downtown, which is another whole story. We'll have to do another segment about that because
another day.
The way it worked out is yes, it should have been handled by the Philadelphia Police Department, but because of things between the DA's office and the police department, and there was news stories getting out, someone was leaking news stories. The news would be at search warrants before we were even there. So that's one of the reasons why they kept it kind of secret within the DA's office and allowed me to get the arrest warrants for everybody. 10 years, it's amazing how fast time goes by just for the conviction. But what a story that you guys keep in the limelight, and it should be, because this should never be forgotten. This should never happen again. And what's going on now, continuing, it's unbelievable how humanity can turn a blind eye to what's going on now. And a little throw out there, I don't know if you guys ever heard of Leroy Carhart.
Yes, Carhart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just passed away too, and he was another Gosnell.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, God, we hadn't heard
But
about that, about his
Yeah.
passing.
yeah, so
Okay.
they're out there,
They
and we
are
got
out
to
there.
stop them.
Well, Gosnell's not
Yes.
out there anymore. He's in prison, but he used to phone us a lot. He doesn't phone us so much now since we wrote the book on him and that. But he's training for a triathlon because he's going to be exonerated and he's going to be freed.
That's what he says.
That's what he says. We visited him in prison, and he spent a lot of the time putting his hand on Anne's knee because he's a creep. So
Sorry.
it's okay, Jim.
That's all right.
That's probably Gosnell phone. That's probably
That's
Gosnell
probably Gosnell phoning
phoning
you.
you there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
You just talked him up. He's giving me a call right now.
He probably listens to the podcast. Okay, listen.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Thanks, Jim. All the best.
Well, good. I hope to see you guys soon.
You
Yeah,
will.
bye.
You will.
So we did the Gosnell true crime podcast. It's called Serial Killer, a True Crime Podcast. It's about Jim and all those people. It's 6 episodes. You can get it wherever you like your podcast. There'll be a link in the show notes. But do you remember we were interviewing Christine Wexler outside the Gosnell Clinic in Philadelphia. And then we discovered something very interesting. Let's play that clip from the podcast now.
But has anything really changed? Do the regulators now take their responsibility seriously? Are they focused on protecting patients in abortion clinics? Or do they still avert their gaze, leaving women and babies at the mercy of criminals and bad actors? They claim they have changed, but I'm not so sure. For this podcast, we brought former Assistant District Attorney Christine Wexler back to Lancaster Avenue.
Do I like to think about the time that I spent here? No, because it was awful and it was ugly, but I'm proud of the work I did here, certainly.
We were interviewing her outside the closed-up building that used to house Gosnell's abortion clinic. Wandering down the side, a door looked open.
Look, it's open. It's open. The door's open. Look, see, this is the waiting room.
Come in.
Christine would not go in. She's a lawyer and follows the rules.
There's still files over there, and I can't believe the door's actually open. We should probably make a telephone call.
After the interview, we felt we had to see what was behind the doors at 3801 Lancaster Avenue. Inside is a confused, rambling building that's basically a time capsule from the day after the February 2010 raid. There are partially filled in documents, birthday cards on desks. It's like everything stopped dead in its tracks at the Women's Medical Society clinic. Up in Gosnell's office, his family pictures are still on his desk. In a drawer, Gosnell has a collection of pornography, pictures and videos. In other rooms, there is dirty, decrepit machinery. Then at the back, there is a room that shows nothing has changed among Philadelphia's regulators. The room has nothing but shelf after shelf after shelf of medical files of women who had abortions. I say files. In reality, each file has a couple of pages with little medical history, but it does have the woman's name and her address and phone number, and if she had had any previous abortions. I estimated there are about 10,000 files there. No regulator ever thought to come and remove them. They don't care about their well-being or their privacy. They've already moved on, leaving extremely private medical files open for the world to see. Each of those files represents that uncaring attitude. But I am cognizant that the files also represent a life that was extinguished. Stalin once said that a single death is a tragedy, but 1 million deaths is just a statistic. He was making the point that it is easy to become emotional about a single person, less so when it's a large number of victims. I spend a lot of time thinking about baby boy A and Mrs. Monger and their fight for life. But those files brought home the fact that tens of thousands of lives also ended here over Gosnell's 40-year killing spree. Many of these deaths were legal under Pennsylvania's abortion law, which allows abortions up to 6 months. But all those files represented a potential life that is now gone, lost to the world. I wonder who each and every one of them could have been. This podcast is dedicated to them.
And there's the photograph of the files. Every one of those files.
And this is progressive Pennsylvania, where they say that they really care about women and they don't care enough to bother picking up those files with women's personal information, their telephone numbers, their addresses,
yes,
many abortions they've had.
I think we also need to, as you said in the podcast, each one of those files it represents a death. It represents terrible behaviour by the Department of Health and all. But each one of those and the file, I call it a file. It's a couple of pages of nothing, but there's a name, a date, and the recording of a death. And we should never forget that this is about the death of innocence.
And by the way, we won't
people.
forget that, and we won't stop telling this story.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's very important to say that we did this work because of you helping us. And this week we are doing a big drive to try and raise funds to keep doing this work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we would appreciate anything that you can do. We have a matching grant going on right now, so anything that you could donate will be doubled. And we would really ask you to go to unreportedstoriesociety.com, unreportedstoriesociety.com, and donate as much as you can, because we are not finished. And the people, as we have mentioned during this podcast, there is a very dangerous new development where very, very extreme abortion laws are now being brought into legislation in the states. It was all very well to reverse Roe v. Wade, but now states are making decisions about what they want on the legislation. And when they get their way in progressive states, and even in some not so progressive states, it's kind of shocking what's happening, because the pro-life movement is dramatically outspent by the pro-abortion side.
And people don't know the reality of abortion.
And they have Hollywood, and they have the news media.
So that's why we are telling this story in so many different ways: podcasts, movies, plays, and
another way that hasn't happened yet.
And another way that we're still going to do. That's why we need your help, because people need to know the truth. As journalists, we're only interested in bringing them the facts so they can make up their own mind. So please go to unreportedstoriesociety.com. I want to end on a happy note today.
I think that's very important.
Let's end with the possum.
So the last time we talked, by the way, when I was here on my own, I shared some footage with you of the possum, whatever. So there's been a new development.
Several new developments. So there's a possum with babies attached, we believe was
now
forced
look at
out
this.
of...
Oh, but hang on, don't even say it so quickly. Look at this lovely situation. This was new to us, by the way. We're new to marsupials, by the way. We're from Ireland. We have no marsupials in Ireland. So you have just the one marsupial in America, and it's called a possum. We're very fond of the possum. And here you have, look at Mr. Possum, Mrs. Possum with her babies. Look at the babies hanging on for dear life. And then what happens?
I think that possum was forced out from next door. Next door had a flood, and they had a pump running 24 hours a day. You can probably, I don't know if we're playing sound there or not, but I think it was forced out from there, so forced out of their home. But then, since then, we have had a whole slew of possums. We've had Mrs. Possum. We've had kind of a middle-aged possum. Let's have a look at that. Or an old, young. Then we had a super baby possum.
Yeah,
look at him up
that was last night
on the bowl.
Yeah, and he has to get it now. So basically, it's turning into a wildlife reserve.
And then we got a crow that comes along and picks up.
And then during the day, if there's anything left in that bowl, but by the way, the timing is absolutely crucial. We basically put the food out for the possum around 9 o'clock at night, and at 9:05, the possums arrive. And
they're lined up outside the fence.
They clean before them. There's not a thing left. It's actually quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
But we really love the possums, and it's funny. The people across the road from us, by the way, had an incident like during,
right.
and this it's hilarious. So middle of the night, 4 o'clock in the morning, they could hear that their cat making a huge fuss, and their cat has a tendency to bring things back that are alive and put them in the bath and then play with them. So the husband got up. The wife said to the husband, get up and find out what's in the bath." So the cat is in the bath with a baby possum. The baby possum was still alive. So what they did with the baby possum, which is hilarious, the two of them looked at each other and went, "Well, we know where the baby possum needs to go. The baby possum needs to go over to Anne and Phelim's house, because that's where all the possums live."
Yeah, I assume that is the baby possum that we just saw on the... I hope it is.
Yeah.
That's,
so
that's what I'm telling myself.
So
anyway.
anyone out there who has advice for us about the possums, please, the one piece of advice we do not want to stop feeding the possums. We actually like feeding the possums. There's nothing wrong with possums. They do not bring disease. They're very clean. They're very nice. They have lovely, ugly hands and very bad teeth, which reminds us of our own dentistry problems in Europe. And so we just love the possum now. There's no harm in the possum. And
that's what you're telling yourself anyway.
No.
Write in the notes below. Tell us what your thoughts are on possums. and American possums. Okay, this is the end of the show.
This
Thank
is
you
the
very
end of the
much
show.
for
And
coming.
again, remember this is a very special, kind of a special episode, remembering Gosnell 10 years later.
So buy the Gosnell book if you want more information.
Yes, actually, there it is. There, we're very proud of the book.
New York Times bestseller, even though they didn't want it to
Even though
declare it.
they didn't want to declare it, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I was going to read a part of it, but you know what? We've kind of run out of time, unfortunately.
Well,
today.
could we play a little excerpt? Maybe you read excerpts of the grand jury, or do you want to read it?
No, we
some?
can actually read. We can actually take a tape of it from the Audible version of the book. Actually,
Yes.
that's what we'll do.
Yeah.
We'll play a little bit. We'll play out this episode with a little bit of the book from the Audible version, which I narrated.
Yes.
And let's do that. And
We'll talk to you next week.
we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you, bye.
Bye-bye. On June the 10th, 2015, a small group of people gathered at Laurel Hill Cemetery overlooking the Schuylkill River to commemorate the 47 babies whose bodies were discovered frozen in Gosnell's clinic. The mourners consisted of clergy, pro-life activists, and others touched by the stories of how the children had died. Roman Catholic Archbishop Charles Chaput and pro-life activists had mounted a campaign to obtain custody of the babies' remains from the city so that they might be buried properly. They had learned, to their sadness, that the babies had already been buried by the city at Laurel Hill on September the 12th, 2013. The medical examiner's office explained that this was standard procedure for bodies not claimed by any next of kin. It's true. Near the burial site of the 47 Gosnell victims is a small tombstone marking where the city buried 1,500 unclaimed bodies in 2010. Alliance Defending Freedom attorney Catherine Glenn Foster acknowledged that, in the end, Philadelphia officials had fulfilled the wishes of all who wished to pay their respects to the babies. Today we can say that the city of Philadelphia has heard us. They gave these babies a place to be buried, she said. These babies were like any other, precious little persons, Foster told the mourners gathered in the summer sun. How a person dies doesn't make anyone less human. Try as hard as he might, neither their killer nor his infamy could erase these babies' humanity. We will use this sacred place to cry, to remember, and to say, this ends here. During the memorial service, well-wishers placed a temporary marker and a small blue silk flower to indicate where the babies were buried. It reads, "May God welcome the souls of these children killed by Kermit Gosnell and the souls of all children killed by abortion into the joy of heaven." The mourners also brought flowers and white wooden crosses. But the people who had petitioned for the babies' bodies felt that the city had let Gosnell's victims down. It was wrong, they said, that the children had been buried secretly. The Reverend Patrick Mahoney, director of the Washington, D.C.-based Christian Defense Coalition, said at the memorial, "I would simply say this to the medical examiner and the Philadelphia city government. These children were not unclaimed. We came for months after months seeking these children in love. They were not unclaimed. They were wanted. They were desired. They had meaning and purpose. It's a sentiment we share."